So it would be hard to imagine doing breakfast without at least mentioning eggs, right? It's just, for so many people, it's a quintessential part of breakfast. Certainly doesn't need to be, and we do run a version of this course that's entirely plant-based, but as I mentioned, we also have a version of the course that is really trying to help people move along a spectrum from maybe a more traditional American diet, which is, well known to be not very healthful, rich in processed foods, low in plant foods, certainly not great for our health. But where do eggs fall, right? So there's, 1 month there's a study saying, oh, they're a great source of protein, jump on the bandwagon of, this diet or that, which has a ton of eggs in it. The next month there's a study saying, oh my gosh, don't have any, you'll, die of heart disease. And it feels like there's not really much middle ground. So how can you get this really conflicting data? So in nutrition studies, they're really tricky to do, first of all, because in, say, drug studies where you can make just one change in a big group of people. You can give one group a drug and one group a placebo, so they might all think they're taking the drug, living life normally, and then it's pretty easy to compare what's happening with the drug because you have a control group. Not so with diet, right? So we're not just having one thing, we're not just making one change. We eat different things for different meals. We eat many meals in the course of a week, a year, our lifetime. And it's really hard to nail down the individual contribution, whether it's a healthful contribution or a risky contribution to our health from any individual food. When we look at diet studies related to eggs, looking at US data, it seems pretty clear that there's a link between heart disease and diabetes with high consumption of eggs. Certainly if you're having, more than 3 per week. When you look at data from, say, Japan or some European countries, there's really, not that link at all, or, it's very cloudy. It seems that there's not a clear connection between those things. So is it that we're, completely different people living in these places? More than likely not. What seems a more likely contributor to the outcomes in those data, especially in the US, is, think about what we're having in a big standard American breakfast. We're having eggs, often 2 or 3 at a time. We're having bacon, sausage, lots of processed meats, which are, along with very processed carbohydrates, some of the least healthy things that we can consume. Certainly all the saturated fat and, other components that occur in cooking of processed meats are some of the riskiest foods we can have. Certainly increase our risk of heart disease and diabetes. And then, on top of that, we're adding in those highly processed carbohydrates like, pancakes, waffles, muffins, pastries. We're having juices, which are mostly sugar or are processed in our body mostly like sugar, and just an enormous number of calories at that meal. So what about having eggs with a otherwise really healthful breakfast, rich in whole grains, vegetables, fruits, nuts, seeds, all these other healthful components? There's not a good study of people eating like that and then, having the occasional egg. Even looking at the data that's showing the highest risk of consuming eggs, if you're having on average about a half of egg per day, even if you have heart disease and diabetes, you're probably okay. If you don't have either of those conditions, having a modest amount is probably okay, especially in the context of an otherwise healthful diet. But certainly if you want to be, if your goal is like you're not that worried about cutting them out and you want to absolutely ensure that you're having the healthiest diet possible, probably it is. If you want to be extra safe, you can certainly leave them out, and we give you tons of other options where you're never going to miss them in this course. But for those of you that are using eggs as a good, inexpensive protein source, certainly it's a lot better than processed meats and highly processed carbohydrates, then I'll show you a few cooking methods for them. We'll go through hard-boiled eggs, showing you a variety of different timings and how they come out. We'll do fried eggs, so we'll do over easy, over medium, over hard, and we'll also do scrambles. So with the scrambles, it's a really good opportunity to show you how to incorporate more vegetables. Anytime you can add those, whole grains, fruits, vegetables, nuts, and seeds, you're going to improve the overall health quality of that meal. So, getting some into your scramble is a great idea. Making an omelet with veggies, you can just use the natural binding quality of the eggs to help that fold and stick together. You don't need to add a whole bunch of cheese or meats in there as well. And, also absolutely check out some of the tofu scramble recipes that we've given. Great way to have a fully plant-based breakfast, especially with a lot of qualities reminiscent of the eggs without any worry about cholesterol. And a note about cholesterol that I didn't mention earlier is that it only occurs in animal foods. So plant foods don't have any cholesterol. So if you're having a fully or predominantly plant-based diet, you're getting no to very little cholesterol. And eggs are quite high in cholesterol, probably the highest cholesterol food. But it's more than just cholesterol in terms of what's going to affect the cholesterol when we take your blood and measure it in the lab. So when you eat cholesterol, your liver will often compensate by reducing how much it makes. Your liver is an organ in the body that makes cholesterol. If you make more than your liver can reduce, then once that balance is off, then you'll definitely raise your blood cholesterol the more you eat. You have to have a quite high amount of cholesterol in your diet to do that. The other piece of the diet that's really important for heart disease risk is saturated fat. So we know saturated fat from animal products absolutely is going to increase your risk for heart disease and diabetes, as well as other chronic diseases. And further looking at the components of a cholesterol panel. So when you're looking at those numbers that come back from the lab, the other thing that's really important to consider is processed carbohydrates. So one of the things that raises triglycerides, or the fat in the blood, is actually having a high amount of processed carbohydrate in the body. It sounds counterintuitive that the fat in your blood would go up with a high amount of processed carbohydrate, but it is absolutely true. So the more you can reduce saturated fat and cholesterol in the diet, the more that you can reduce processed carbohydrates, the better that your cholesterol profile, when you get it checked in the lab, is going to be. And even when some people do things perfectly, their genetic predisposition is just that those are never going to be normal. But if you're someone who's kind of on the edge and you're really wanting to get those numbers in line so you can say avoid medication or reduce risk of heart disease or high cholesterol, then certainly making some of these dietary changes that we're recommending in this course are going to be really helpful and your best chance of getting there. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started with some of these egg recipes.